Critics Podcast.
Armchair Critics Podcast.
Members of the notorious Armchair Critics Podcast have been arrested for having too many opinions.
Armchair Critics Podcast!
Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of Armchair Critics. I'm your host, Ethan Engert.
And I'm your host, Aiden Howe.
And this week, we will be doing our very first episode on a film neither of us has seen, Brian De Palma's Scarface. Aiden, what are your thoughts on this?
I heard a lot about this movie over the years. It's such a cultural icon, and I had no idea if I would like it or not. Kind of violent, over-the-top sort of classic films like this tend to be very hit or miss for me. I either love them or hate them. And Scarface, I loved it. I thought it was amazing. It's just like, it's so over the top throughout and just excessive, kind of leading up to that absolute like explosion of a finale that it works. It's just kind of pure cinematic bliss. It's everything about it is excessive in a way that reminds me of Scorsese in many ways, but also feels even more unhinged than something Scorsese would do. Where it's 3 hours long, it's soaked with blood, it's fueled with passion, it's furious, it's hilarious, it's like explosively tragicomic. The entire thing just feels like a fever dream.
Yeah.
It feels like something that was dreamed up by Tony Montana while high on coke. This movie feels like a face full of cocaine. That's how I'm going to put it.
This is a dream of the American dream.
I
pulled out that same exact comparison to Scorsese. He has a couple films like this in his filmography. I've got a little something here. I said, when the style of 80s Miami and the style of Brian De Palma meet, you know you're in good hands. Scarface is the story of the greedy come-up who's blinded by the brilliance of the American dream and crushed by the opulent life as it comes crashing down on them in the end. This story has been told in some of the most elite films in history, but De Palma manages to include Scarface in that prestigious list by adding some refreshing flourishes that hadn't been seen before and haven't been replicated since. Flourishes you can only find in a film with the name Brian De Palma attached to it. So, yeah, I think this is very similar to, Goodfellas, Mean Street, Wolf of Wall Street, all Scorsese films, but the same, type of American dream, crushed by the American dream. And it's unique amongst them. Even bringing in other titles, you could compare this to The Godfather. We recently did Heat, another story of obsession, and it's just different because it's Brian De Palma. And a word I used was refreshing. It really was. I as it started to get going, and as I was thinking about it, I was worried that this is a story I've seen couple times in cinema. I was worried that it would just be kind of trite, kind of a duplicate, but it was different enough that it's one of my favorites of that genre.
I gotta fully agree. Yeah, it's the age-old story in a way. It's the age-old American story, But I think, like you said, De Palma is able to put his own spin on it enough to keep it fresh and interesting throughout. I never felt like I was watching, a Scorsese ripoff or a Scorsese wannabe. It's very much its own identity. I think one of the things that really contributes to that is just kind of how the story begins, and it's got this sort of historical and socio-political context that Scorsese generally leaves out of his films. It's written by Oliver Stone, who I can't say that I've seen any of his other movies, but I am familiar with his work. He loves to do political movies. He's done a bunch of movies about presidents. He did one about JFK, one about Nixon, one about George Bush, and he did a movie about Snowden, Edward Snowden, about 6 years ago. Oh, he also did Natural Born Killers. Didn't know that. But it seems like he likes to do sort of films that are a combination of character studies and sort of a semi-political treatise of sorts. And I'd say that's what Scarface is. You've got, like you said, this young kind of hungry immigrant who comes from Cuba, which, is very restrictive in a land of totalitarianism, to America, Miami of all places, which is just unfettered freedom. Right. And he's he's sort of drunk on the American dream. He does what he wants. He is able to become a massive success. In a way, it's sort of a gruesome parody in some ways, I'd say, of a movie we've seen a million times. Think about like an American Tale. You ever see that movie? Yeah. It's sort of like that formula. If you got the poor little immigrants, who come from the totalitarian land where they come from. In an American Tale, it's Russia, and Russia and Cuba were both communists at this point in history. They come from there, and in an American Tale, they discover America, and it's fantastic. And they become sort of prosperous, and they're able to leave behind kind of the toughness and starvation that they're used to and become happy. Whereas in Scarface, same thing. Immigrant comes in, he gets everything he wants, and he is miserable. It utterly destroys him. We only see him happy, I'd say, a few times, particularly like early in the film when he's committing acts of violence. That's when he really lights up, and the rest of the time he just seems kind of like apathetic. It's interesting.
Yeah. Right off the bat, you're right. You kind of understand the philosophy of Tony Montana, and it is that he's blinded by the American dream. He doesn't understand what it's going to bring him, and he has that incredibly restrictive communist background, and he just wants complete and total freedom. And he comes to America, and he's dumbfounded. It's like stimulus overload. There's that one line that really stuck out to me. I can't remember exactly what he says, but he's working as like this dishwasher, and across the street he sees all these richer people going to a club. He's just come to America. He says he's looking at them, and he's upset. He's like, man, we should be out on the streets picking up the gold. Like that idea that the streets in America are paved with gold. And it's just, he has like this idyllic imagination of what the land of the free is. And when he starts swinging for it, it's not there. And he comes up empty. He gets his immediate desires, but his desires don't satiate the desires he truly has.
And it completely destroys him. Yeah. And what's interesting about it is he's almost entirely villainous and presented as such throughout the movie. But there are these little like glitters of nuance to his character, and these little like parts of self-awareness, that kind of lead you to think like, to what extent is he really that bad of a guy? Because there's part of him that's going like, this is terrible, man. This is messed up. You should not be doing this. Like the restaurant scene. One of the most interesting scenes in the movie, because he stands up, and I think this is sort of Oliver Stone talking to us. He stands up and he goes, I'm the bad guy. You can point to me and you can go, oh, there's the bad guy. But really, none of you are very different from me. You're all high on the American dream, just like I am. And it's destroying every last one of you as it is destroying me. The only difference is that I'm on the other side of the law. And therefore, I'm the bad guy in your worldview. And you can have someone you can point to, and you can say, that's the bad guy, and forget about your own sins in the process.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm ready to jump there because that's one of the things I wrote down. I'm captivated by the bad guy speech. That's what I called it. And I was surprised in that moment because, that's a place that these films don't often go. You could kind of argue that Wolf of Wall Street gets there on the satirical way where you are vicariously enjoying the debauchery of the actual characters, but it's never explicitly said by this protagonist villain out loud to these people, basically to the camera, that kind of like the central theme of the film. It was very interesting. I said it felt like the world was expanded there. It felt like maybe not a more intellectual piece. Maybe that's not the right word to use, but maybe something more sophisticated, something more self-aware. And
more candid with its themes.
Right, yeah. It took it to another level where I was just like, Goodfellas, for many reasons, is a very cinematic piece of cinema. And this is as well. But Scarface, I think you could argue Goodfellas is better than this, and I might side with you. But Scarface gets more grounded than any other film in this genre of rags to riches I think I've ever seen.
I gotta agree. And honestly, I've it's only been my first watch of each. I've only watched Goodfellas once, but I think on a first watch at least, I might even like Scarface more than Goodfellas.
That's bold.
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack in this movie regarding character relationships. Tony Montana himself is, like I said, sort of fascinating as a character who initially appears two-dimensional, but reveals himself to become gradually more three-dimensional as the movie goes along. And his relationships with other characters are very interesting. Particularly, it's kind of uncomfortable to talk about because it ends so horribly, but I want to talk about his relationship with his sister. I think she sort of represents innocence to him.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And she wants to be an adult, she doesn't want to be innocent like he wants her to. So in a way, he's sort of being the bad guy there too. He's sort of restricting her into his worldview. But she's sort of the last vestige of innocence to him. And she doesn't get it. She assumes that he is so evil, that he is so debauched, that like the only reason he's being so nice to her and that he's like trying to protect her the way he is because he wants to sleep with her. I don't think he does,
I don't either.
Yeah, I think it's just her again trying to sort of fit. Oh, it's sort of a reflection of the bad guy speech in a way, because it's her and her mom also trying to fit Tony into their worldview where he's the bad guy. They're trying to take that black and white worldview. You can literally see it reflected on the movie's poster. It's half black and it's half white. It's this worldview, and the movie initially seems like it's just a complete celebration of evil throughout, and then reveals itself to be a lot more nuanced as it goes along.
Yeah, that relationship, or maybe not even the relationship, but the presence of that character, of his sister, is maybe the most captivating part of this movie to me after rewatch, as I continue to think about it, because it's very nuanced, and I found myself kind of challenged with that character while I was watching the film, because it counters your preconceptions of these, he's kind of that mafia type character where you usually see like the Godfather, these awful terrible people, but they love family, and so they've got that affinity for the family, and so they have this kind of moral groundedness. And you think either Tony Montana's a bad guy all around, or he has that love for his family. And it's kind of neither, actually. He cares about his sister in a selfish way. As in, like, I would sacrifice for you if I enjoy the sacrifice. I would not let you live your life and do whatever you want and hang out with whoever you want, but I'll give you money. That's the part of my life that I'll allow to share with you.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. As you said, she embodies innocence, and the film, it took it there. It's kind of explicit. I think his best friend throughout the film says it, verbalizes that sentiment. That she's kind of, the only innocent part of his life. It's interesting when she dies at the end. That's kind of the last thing in his life that he realizes. With her gone, there's absolutely nothing that separates me from being a complete 100% villain.
Mm-hmm. And it's right at the end when she dies that he dies too. It's almost like, in a way, she was sort of anchoring him. You could make the argument, Because it's like right after she dies, he just completely spirals out of control. For the next 2 minutes of his life, he's utterly out of his mind. He kills a bunch of people. He remains alive much longer than he should. And then he finally dies in the most dramatic way possible. And that crackling firework of a final scene.
Yeah, he at one point in the middle of a firefight, he just drops his gun and starts soaking bullets, That's a scene I've seen before, maybe only one time in its entirety before this film. So I kind of knew what was coming, and I kind of had this thought that might be true, might be a little skewed, but once she was killed, maybe he wasn't committing suicide, but he was certainly just like, I'm gonna go out there, and if I don't live, I really do not care. He's so utterly miserable with the life he's created. There's no way back. He's killed his best friend himself, and his sister is now dead. He's estranged from his mother. There's nobody in his life. He's utterly alone. He goes out, and A Blaze of Glory is the perfect fitting ending to such a dramatic story.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's very significant, I think, that it takes place right in the foyer of his incredibly grand house.
Yeah.
He comes out of this room with his like $50,000 ornate desk literally covered in cocaine. And he's in this massive sweeping foyer. And the shootout, there's literally a massive neon sign right below him that says "The world is yours," which is kind of the, sort of gruesomely ironic catchphrase of the movie. And as he falls right into this gorgeous, super expensive fountain with a massive splash of neon lit water and blood.
Yeah.
It's just pure excess. It's showing us dying right in the middle of his possessions. It's almost like, the movie is saying that he's like being buried with his money. He has, from a worldly viewpoint, everything that you could possibly want, and yet he has absolutely nothing.
Yeah. I think that tagline really sticks out. As he had that like ironic thing that like from, young Tony Montana at the beginning of the film, he expected that. I mean, he did get the world as far as he could imagine, but he was not satisfied. And there's, along with that's kind of an image, a recurring image, a motif, really, that is backed with a certain theme we see whenever The World Is Yours displayed on the screen. And that final moment, that was the most impactful moment in a film that I've seen for a little bit. Hearing that leitmotif with that symbolism as he's dead and the camera pans out the final shot of the film. But that moment got me every single time. There's a great one where this blimp goes by that just is carrying the sign on the side that just says "The world is yours," but it has that theme there. And I remember thinking, I was like, this is a powerful moment. How come this is not like a one of the top 100 most recognizable scenes on Watch Mojo or something? It's
freaking Watch Mojo.
I saw that and I was like, and it comes either right at the midpoint or right at the third act turn. I can't remember which, but it's just like he's so delusional. He sees that, and it's almost like he digs his heels back in and he says, "You're right. The world is mine. I just got to keep going on the path that I'm going on." And that's wrong, objectively wrong.
It seems like the universe is sort of pushing him inexorably toward the fate that he's set up for himself. The movie is just so nuts and so cinematic. Like, you never know what to expect next. I mean, by all rights, Tony Montana should not survive until the end. He's in all sorts of like crazy life or death situations,
He's in
and
like
he
this
just barely makes it.
political assassination.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. The fact that is just like the opener to the movie says a lot about how insane it is. It starts out with our main character assassinating a high up executive in the Cuban government.
Yeah.
In the middle of a riot in like a shanty town.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never knew what to expect. The part of that sticks out the most to me is like, so what's interesting about it, it's 3 hours long and it never gives you a moment to breathe. Right after he dies, and like you said, after he's fallen into the fountain and the camera starts panning out with that leitmotif, it hits you with the like, this movie is dedicated to Howard Hawks.
Yeah.
And I nearly burst out laughing, not necessarily because it was funny, but just because it was so ridiculously unexpected after that gory shootout. I mean, this is the guy who made His Girl Friday,
Yeah.
And it's like, yep, this insane cocaine-fueled gangster movie that you just watched is dedicated to him. What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I think this is like a great example of two separate artists, at the top of their game, coming together and creating something unique. I still like I said, I was ready for a good take on a generic story, but this is a script that is different than its predecessors and the films that come after it. We keep mentioning Goodfellas. That was made after this, and it is still. One thing that I took away from this film, maybe the most recent life lesson, unique compared to it, but also I think one thing that personally I was more enthralled by was Brian De Palma's contribution. He made it, a very cinematic film in a way. If I think of the two most cinematic directors of all time, one of them is Martin Scorsese, and it's cinematic in a different way. And maybe I need to put De Palma higher on that list, because there are these, I can think of these very indulgent wide angle shots and eccentric sets and super smooth camera movements that just shoot this film in a very elegant way. In the latter half of Goodfellas, it turns into like this gritty paranoia, bad trip, basically. And there are elements of that in the script, but De Palma pulls out still this suave enjoyment of 80s Miami, elegant crime, you could call it. And it's very enjoyable to see.
Very evocative. You really feel the place. I mean, when you're watching this movie, you can practically feel like the sun on the back of your neck, as he's like walking around the beach and stuff. That's a great point. Fantastic directing throughout. I think, like you said, the thing that stuck out the most to me was the camera movements. And particularly, there's that one where like it's the chainsaw scene,
Yes!
And Tony Montana is in the apartment and his buddy's being literally cut apart with a chainsaw in front of him. And the camera just sort of smoothly, elegantly pans out of the apartment, slides comfortably down to the car where Manny and the other guy are seated, and they're like flirting with a girl. And then it slowly pans right back up into the apartment and gets right back to the mayhem. It's just insane. And, I'm even wondering how they did that in the 80s. I guess they put the camera on a wire or something. It's unbelievable. It's crazy. A lot of great camera movements throughout. The camera like slides through walls and all sorts of stuff. Overall, I'd say it's a little less flashy than Scorsese's directing.
Yeah,
there's no one shot that stuck out to me quite the same way that one like long take in Goodfellas does when they're walking through the restaurant.
Oh yeah.
But I think that sort of because Brian De Palma is aware of just how absolutely nuts and like cinematic the material itself is that you are witnessing. And he cuts back a little on the flashy style in order to compensate for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is the third De Palma film I've seen. I've also seen the original Mission Impossible and Blowout. And
I think this is my second. I've just seen the first Mission Impossible.
Okay, yeah. But, you can see, even from that, the first Mission Impossible is able to create this franchise with this, concept of over-the-top, espionage. And the cinematography there is unique to the action-adventure genre. And Blowout is one of the most uniquely shot films I've seen. It always stands out in my memory. And so I was ready for some of the craziness that we saw here. But you're right. Brian De Palma is able to hold back in an equally impressive way. You're right. He allows the material to be as exciting as it is, and he doesn't muddy it up with more flash. I can think simultaneously in that, or not simultaneously, at the end of that scene, I have three favorite camera movements in this film, and they all come from that scene. And one of them is when the main assailant, the main antagonist of that entire encounter, is fleeing from the apartment or hotel or whatever it was. And the camera just like slowly follows Tony down the staircase, and the guy's just like scrambling in the streets. People are looking at this bloody guy, and the camera just like holds with Tony as he walks around the guy holding his gun, and then he just like points it and shoots, and it's done, and all shot on wide angle. And it's a very reserved, held back videography in terms of camera work, but it's punchy for that reason.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, it fits the tone well because, Brian De Palma, I mean, this is a movie defined by excess, but De Palma, again, like knows exactly when to cut it back so it's not too much. I mean, he recognizes, this is 3 hours long. You can't take 3 hours of flashiness. It'd be like, watching MTV for 3 hours or something. You wouldn't be able to take it.
You'd overdose on Scarface.
For real. Imagine watching a TV series of this. Oh, man. One thought I had. So, I've heard a lot about this movie over the years because it's so iconic and had such an impact on a lot of like subcultures over the last 40 years or so. This movie is a lot funnier than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
It's so funny at times. The scene in the bathtub, for example, is, it's sort of important for the plot and developing themes in many ways, and it does have some like interesting sort of gut-wrenching dramatic moments, but it's hilarious. I mean, he's literally sitting in a gold-plated bathtub with a pillow against his back, smoking a cigar. Funniest part to me is that he's watching TV and he's just complaining the entire time. And he interrupts this heated argument with his wife to point at a bunch of flamingos on TV and yell like, "Look at the pelicans flying! Fly, pelicans!"
I saw that and I was like, when did Tony Montana turn into a 40-year-old dad?
It's perfect.
One thing that I took away from this film, maybe the most recent life lesson I've learned is if you're trying to pick up a girl, the tiger print seats inside of a car, not the move. What you should do is a line of coke and then kiss her, and that's what works every time.
Tony Montana is an alpha male. Take dating advice from him because his marriage ended up so well. What happened to his wife, by the way? Did we ever find out what happened to her? She just like didn't call him back, right?
I think she just leaves. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at Wikipedia here, see if anything is said about it. She leaves and is never seen by Tony again. Okay, Wikipedia has no idea either. Go figure.
Well, I want to take you to the very opening of the film. Well, it starts with that very interesting choice for a beginning, almost like this newsreel of, looks like found footage. I wonder if they actually shot that or if that was actual footage of the event that they were describing.
Looks like it might be news footage, yeah.
Yeah. That was very cool, very unique. I enjoyed that. But right after that, it's snappy dialogue, cool camera movements, a nice set. You got this like hazy, these guys are smoking in this room. It's hazy and the sun is coming through these tinted windows. And this is some of the most concise exposition I've ever seen in a film. In one scene, all of the exposition is done. I know exactly everything I need to know about Tony Montana, about the state of the U.S. at the time, Montana's character, as well as his philosophy. And I was shocked. Like I kept watching. I was like, all right, I know everything I need to know. Oh, shoot, now I know everything I do. Oh, now I know everything I need to know. There's just so much information. It was very impressive.
And yet it manages to deliver it smoothly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was one of the most entertaining scenes in the film.
Skillful exposition is a beautiful thing to witness. I was reminded bizarrely of like Die Hard even, which I think is a very underrated example of good exposition in film. Where in the first scene, you meet Bruce Willis's character and you can tell a lot about him just from like his attitude and like little conversations he has with people on the plane that he's on. Then he gets in the car with his limo driver, who's just like questioning him about stuff. And then you learn absolutely everything you need to know within like a minute and a half of conversation, and it feels very natural.
Yeah.
Same thing here. Tony Montana, I mean, and a lot of it is, a fair amount of it is just due to Al Pacino, like giving a really good performance. Man's got attitude coming out of his ears.
Yeah.
And you can immediately tell just by looking at him and the way he moves and the way he looks at the cops around him, like exactly what he thinks of the place and exactly what kind of guy he is. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
And that in addition to the very economic script, like you described.
Yeah, Pacino is way up there for me in my top 5 favorite actors, at least. And he always gives very physical performances, which really benefited this character here, he also notoriously gives pretty aggressive performances, partially because of this film, because Tony Montana is a very aggressive individual. And, you know, in moments where he is standing still with 2 feet planted in the ground, he is still he gives very physical performances through, like, his face. I remember watching one specific scene and losing myself just watching him give dialogue and realize I actually didn't pick up on anything he said and had to rewind because I was so focused on just watching him say stuff. He's captivating here. And then, of course, when he gets to let loose, like that scene in the hot tub, the bath, and most famously, the final scene, the showdown in his mansion, you know, watching him let loose is so entertaining. And that's why I would buy a ticket to see a Al Pacino film, moments like that.
He's very entertaining, and it's very Pacino-ish performance in that regard. But also, what most impressed me about it, I gotta say, is that he just disappeared into the role. I literally forgot I was watching Al Pacino because he's so good in it.
Yeah.
You know? Like everything about his atmosphere and just like, you know, his resting facial expressions, his haircut, everything, it just perfectly describes the character. He's just like unkempt and haggard and kind of apathetic, except in moments of violence where he just lets loose and becomes enraged. You know, he nails the accent perfectly.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't sound like Pacino at all.
No.
He's just phenomenal in every aspect of it. And that intense charisma is what is able to anchor the movie. It would not work half as well without Pacino as the leading man. I'm convinced that I don't think there's any other actor who could have done this. Like, De Niro, maybe, but he tends to be a lot more dialed back than Pacino in his roles, and that's really not what this movie demanded. This movie demanded that chaotic touch, that kind of freewheeling spirit.
Yeah. You brought up De Niro. Pacino and De Niro, I always compare them as like the 2 most comfortable actors in the roles that I get. I'm always impressed by that, and this was another great example of that. One thing that I found very cool about this film was this original crime boss that Tony Montana is working with, Lopez. He's this Jewish crime boss who he's starting the film at the top and kind of takes Tony Montana under his wing. And I thought the reason this guy was very cool is because you get to, throughout the course of the film, compare these two to each other. As Montana, obviously, throughout the entire film, is comparing himself to Lopez. And at the very beginning, you know, I was aware of the fact that this is the way De Palma was going to use this character. Not De Palma, but the way that he was written into the script. Because he comes out as this almost, you know, kind of grotesquely indulgent a crime boss. You see, he has a lot of wealth, and he's kind of stagnated. He's not the kind of person I'd want to hang out with. Tony makes it clear he's not the kind of person he would like to hang out with.
He's just kind of ludicrously, disgustingly rich, and he has nothing to do with his life.
Yeah. He's loud and overbearing. And the scene where he takes Tony to that club. What was it called? The Babylon or something like that.
I think it was the Babylon Club. Yeah.
The Babylon
Oh,
Club.
that's a nice little bit of sort of biblical reference there, because Babylon was known for being sort of toppled by its own excess, for being a very decadent civilization that kind of fell apart with that. I mean, in Revelation, it's literally used as the symbol of like lust and excess on earth.
Wow.
The whore of Babylon.
That is a great touch. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
No, I was just saying, in that scene, you see like Montana kind of leans away as Lopez like leans into him. And Montana gives Lopez just enough, interaction and affection to say, I'm on your team. I'm not going to like it, but I am. And then it takes it to the conclusion, the scene where Montana essentially usurps Lopez, where he transcends and surpasses the level that Lopez was ever able to reach. Was when Lopez became satisfied with life. And Tony said, you cannot be satisfied with life. That is not my goal. My goal is just to have as much as possible. But Lopez backs off, and Montana wants to go. And it comes to the scene where it's a showdown. Montana like storms his office, and he's holding Lopez at gunpoint. And Lopez desperately begs for his life. He kneels and grovels at Tony's feet, and Tony is not pleased with that at all. And you can compare that to the way that Tony dies. He is not giving up. He took out 10 guys when he died. He's got, rockets attached to his gun. He's blowing his house up and soaks like 30 bullets at the end. And it's very interesting to see, even in their final moments, this character reflects Tony has everything he can possibly get, but he's not willing to stop moving. He keeps going, and it's sadder than it is noble, because like I said, Lopez was satisfied with his life, and Tony never ever was during the course of this film.
Yeah. And at the end you got to wonder like who was more at peace in a way, the man who died groveling or the man who died killing other people, taking as many people with him, Mm-hmm. It's sort of that archetypal contrast between them. It's very interesting. Yeah. Lopez was a cool character. One thing that you brought up, you got the characters sort of showing who they really are in their last minutes. There were several character deaths in this movie, and it'd be interesting to kind of think about, what do they show about the characters. The one that sticks out to me is Tony's friend Manny.
Yes.
And he, the last thing he does before he's shot and killed by Tony is sort of like give Tony a really big grin and kind of open his arms wide, to welcome him. And that's what makes it really, really brutal and sad as a death. And his sister crying over him and going, we were about to announce our engagement. Just brutal. And it kind of shows, Tony's reaching the end of his tether here, to the point that not only is he pushing away people who were sort of important to him, like Elvira, I think he cares about more for sexual purposes than anything else, but he still cares about her, and she ends up getting pushed away, to Manny, who's the one other character who we've been with since the very beginning of the movie. And, he is just killed by Tony because Tony, is distrustful of him. And again, because Tony feels that he's sort of encroaching on his sister's innocence.
Yeah.
That's brutal.
Yeah. As sad as it was, I loved that scene, or particularly just that moment. I think that's one of the best movie deaths ever. Maybe my favorite. I can't think of many off the top of my head. But the sound design, he shoots the gun, it sounds like a cannon. He sees his best friend dying on the ground, and then shoots him again. And it's more shocking the second time, And these slow-mos, close-up zooms, the camera's doing some crazy stuff, kind of reminiscent of the ending of Heat. It kind of exemplifies everything I love about this film in that it is unique, a unique take on something that is proven to be good. It's done in a very sensually kind of over-the-top pleasing way. But the third thing is it's meaningful. Like this hits you hard on the emotional, oh my gosh, you just killed your friend. But on the intellectual, like, okay, you're such a bad person that you killed your friend.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of a good way to describe the movie overall. It hits you in a bunch of different ways. All right, Ethan. I've got a kind of weird question for you. What do you think was your least favorite aspect of this overall very good movie?
That one's a thinker.
For me, it's also difficult to think of one. I do think the score was a little weird for my taste.
Really?
It wasn't. Yeah. I don't think it was necessarily bad, I guess. It just very much took some getting used to. It felt very melodramatic and stuff, you know. For the first hour or so, I really wasn't liking it. By the end, I'd kind of gotten used to it, and I was vibing with it. And I was like, you know, this fits the tone of the movie well. And they're in Miami in the 80s, you know.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't make sense that they'd have a melodramatic synth score. So I don't know if that counts as a nitpick or what. It's something that initially bothered me. And then sort of I warmed to it as the movie went on.
That's interesting. I actually wrote down that I really enjoyed the score. This is our first point of contention on the podcast, maybe half point of contention. But yeah, you're right. It's very of the time synthy. I thought of it, you know, there are definitely some parallels to draw between this and Heat in that Heat is a little bit, you could argue, kind of a parody of this genre of, you know, Miami Vice, like we were saying, type cop show. And this is kind of, you know, dipping its toes in that kind of, you know, exciting, you know, action adventure crime boss, in that it has, you know, exciting camera movements and set pieces. And I think the score reflects that in almost this, you know, genre. I thought that was cool. I also like synths a lot more than most people like synths.
I do generally like synths. Yeah. They were just kind of weird synths, you know, took some getting used to. I don't know. Again, I'm struggling to think of an aspect that I really disliked. I do think maybe the violence was a little over the top at times, but, you know, nothing real bad. It's interesting to kind of look around the production of this movie because it was very controversial when it came out.
Yeah.
Originally, the original cut was given an X rating by the Motion Picture Association of America, which is especially interesting since there's like, especially for a gangster movie, not really very much nudity in this film.
Yeah.
And
a scene.
Yeah, there's like one scene. And but no, it was just too violent for their taste. And what's funny about this is Brian De Palma recut it 3 times, and then the third cut was given an R rating. But he believed that there was so much difference between the cuts that he thought no one would be able to tell. So he successfully released the original cut, which was rated X as R rated in theaters and on home video.
Wow.
And he didn't confess it until like 6 months after it was already out on VHS.
Wow.
That's just so funny.
I would be very interested to see that. Yeah, that's very interesting. I was, I'll have to admit, I was aware of the fact that there was a scene referred to as the chainsaw shower scene. I was also aware of Scarface's reputation. And so maybe this would be my least favorite aspect of the film, which is more of a critique of myself. But I was getting ready for that scene. I was ready to hide behind my hands at this, whatever the chainsaw shower scene is. And the guy pulls out the chainsaw and I'm horrified. And I say, actually, I don't think I want to see this. And then you don't see it at all.
Yeah, it was almost nothing.
Yeah, you see blood on the shower and close-ups of the chainsaw about to cut into flesh. So I wonder. I would not be surprised if there is an original cut where you do get some more slasher moments in there. But I think that actually set my perspective of this film too high, and I thought this isn't as graphic as I was expecting it to be. But maybe on rewatch, I'm gonna have to bring that back down.
Yeah. Kurt Vonnegut, who's a writer I really like, was one person who notably walked out of the film during the chainsaw scene because he just couldn't handle it.
Wow.
And several critics did the same. At the middle of the movie, Scorsese, who was watching it for the first time, turned to Bauer, who I believe was one of the writers, and reportedly told him, "You guys are great, but be prepared because they're going to hate it in Hollywood because it's about them."
Wow.
Yeah. Roger Ebert, however, is one of few critics who loved it upon its initial release, and he gave it 4 out of 4 stars in his 1983 review and added it to his great movies list.
Yes.
He said, De Palma and his writer Oliver Stone have created a gallery of specific individuals, and one of the fascinations of the movie is that we aren't watching crime movie cliches, we're watching people who are criminals. And, you know, that's actually a fantastic point. The characters in this film are quite well developed. Not like, I mean, you know, we've talked about Tony Montana the most because, you know, he's the main character and he goes through the most of a character arc. But this film doesn't have super traditional character arcs necessarily for any of its characters. You know, they just sort of like kind of pop in and out of the movie organically in a way. Right. Like, think about how Elvira just sort of disappears out of nowhere, you know?
Right.
Most movies wouldn't do that. Most movies, and especially since she's such a major part of the plot, most movies would give her sort of the satisfaction of an ending of like knowing exactly what happens to her. But that's not the case. You know, sometimes people just disappear or walk out, and the movie like makes a point of ending so abruptly that it really makes sense that you don't know exactly what happened to her, and that kind of adds to the mystique, and that makes it cool. Manny too. You know, oftentimes movies where like, say, main character kills his friend, you know, you'd have some sort of arc for the friend that would like make him more unlikable or like show something that's leading to his downfall or something. And it kind of shows that by how he gets into a relationship with the sister, I guess. But like, you know, Manny doesn't become necessarily like a worse guy throughout the movie. If anything, he's sort of a voice of reason to Tony. And that, you know, and then he's just immediately killed by Tony upon like opening the door and realizing what's going on. And that makes it even more brutal. It's just like the abruptness and unexpectedness of it.
Yeah.
It's just every character is very well written and feel like real people.
Yeah. I think there might be something to be said about comparing characters to each other. If you compare Tony to Manny, you know, I was thinking they started from the exact same place. You see at the beginning, Tony takes charge. It could have been Manny, though. You know, Manny was the one who had that contact with the drug distributors, and Tony could have, or Manny could have just stepped up and said, you know, I'm running this one. But Tony had a skill set that he was able to exercise better than Manny. However, Manny never gave in as wholeheartedly to this life of debauchery as Tony did. And you see, he, for me, was maybe the most sympathetic character in comparison to Tony, because he's always with Tony, and you just see how terrible Tony is. So, you know, any average Joe looks like an angel, you know, standing next to him. But it's Manny standing next to him, and he has the opportunity to be living the exact same life as Tony, but Manny actively chooses not to be a absolutely awful human being.
It's really funny in a way to watch their interactions because, you know, it's always like Tony ranting about something. You know, they'll be like sitting at the beach and he's like, oh, you know, it's Old Town. I got to conquer it. You know, I got to make it mine. And man, he's just sitting there like, hey, take it easy, man. We're at the beach.
Yeah.
You know, you've got sort of this neurotic, angry character compared to just sort of this normal guy who's along for the ride. And at the end of the day, like you said, they start in the same place. And I think the only thing that really differentiates them and what leads to their respective fates is that Manny is a simple and normal man without that kind of brutality and hunger. And Tony is just an animal, you know? He's like completely out to get what he wants. That'll be with a bit more nuance to his character than initially appears.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to a big question. Aiden, what was your number one favorite scene of Scarface?
Number one favorite scene is difficult. There are a lot of good scenes in this movie. I think it's going to have to come down to two. I guess I could choose from one of those. The bathtub scene is probably my favorite non-action scene. It's just so funny. It drives the plot forward too. I love Elvira and Tony's banter as they just like mock each other. And, you know, it's sort of mean-spirited, but it works. And poor Manny's just sitting there like, you know, and I'm witnessing a marriage falling apart here. And Tony's ADD just periodically breaking away from the conversation to complain or like yell at the TV or whatever will never not be funny, especially in such a movie that's so over the top serious the entire time. However, I think I do got to say it's iconic for a reason. My favorite scene in the entire movie is probably the ending shootout. Yesterday, I just went on YouTube and I rewatched the entire scene again because I felt like it, and it was so good. It's so good. It's just perfectly choreographed. You know, it's clean. You can tell exactly what's going on. And the themes all wrap up nicely in that scene, like we were talking about, with like this massive foyer being shredded by like gunfire and explosions and stuff. And then finally at the very end, you've got Tony Montana, this proud avatar of capitalism, standing astride, screaming in rage as his body is literally riddled with bullets before finally like keeling over and splashing into this pool in an enormous fountain of blood as this neon sign just blinks over him. The world is yours.
Yeah.
It's just a perfect ending to the film in every single way. And I you know, that's what made the movie a masterpiece for me. It wouldn't have been nearly as good without that scene wrapping it up, but it had one hell of an ending, and it really earned it.
It was powerful at multiple points.
Oh yeah. So Ethan, I'm gonna ask you the same thing. What do you think was your favorite scene in Scarface?
Okay, well, I'll answer that question, and afterward, I want to circle back to that bathtub scene you love. But I was going in completely ready for that that final shootout to be my favorite scene, and there is, I think, the single most impactful shot of the film is when he shouts, "Say hello to my little friend," and it blows up his door, and there's like 4 guys behind it. I had seen that, you know, plenty of times, and I was not prepared for it to be as awesome as it was. Watching him, there's just like all this smoke all over. It's like hazy. He's just tearing through this army of like hitmen sent after him. And all the while, you got this super cool guy. You know he's going to be the one to kill Tony because he's wearing sunglasses and he's sneaking up on Tony.
He's like the Terminator with the like evil synth score advancing on him with the shotgun.
Yeah. I love that scene, but I have to say, it was not my number one. That was my number 2. My number 1 was that one scene I mentioned a couple times already that includes the chainsaw shower, that whole, I don't know, he's going to pick up the drugs and drop off the money. They're doing this exchange and it goes wrong. And from the very beginning, it starts out they're in this, you know, crappy convertible, but it is a convertible. In 80s Miami, they're all wearing these tropical t-shirts, and I wrote down what 80s Miami is a setting in a film. As a setting in a film, is one of the coolest there is. Every film should just be set in 80s Miami. But you know, after that, they get ready, they're going, and the first best camera movement in the film is when, you know, Tony's ascending the staircase. and the camera follows him, and it looks like it's just going to like follow him behind, like track behind him going up the staircase, which is possible. That's a pretty clunky way, pretty lazy way to shoot it. So instead, it pans out and just like slowly climbs up the staircase on the outside, very fluidly. Elegant is a word that I wrote down immediately after seeing that. And he goes, and there's this whole exchange, you know, you're ready for it. It's tense because, you know, this scene never goes well in movies, but you're desperately hoping it does. And there's all this setup. There's that one girl laying on the bed, and you don't know it, but beneath her pillow is the shotgun, and they're ready to steal the money and keep the drugs. It turns into this, you know, big shootout. Tony's buddy is chopped up in the shower. You know, it's craziness. But then you have that gorgeous camera movement out the window to the car. We already covered this. And then it wraps up with one of my favorite shots in the entire film. Like I said, the one guy is scrambling down, covered in blood, scrambling down the staircase out into the street, just in the middle of the street. People are watching, you know, they're captivated. And then Tony comes after, and it's just this cinematic wide angle shot showing everything you need to. And I'm ready for Tony to just execute him. And he shouts, "Hey!" And I'm saying, oh, they're going to have a conversation. And then Tony walks around him and he just shoots him anyway. So it's just like, you're ready for something to happen. And the diplomat says, no, that's not what's going to happen. You say, okay, yeah, it just happens anyway. He got me. And it was just from start to finish, I was captivated and very pleased with how elegant it was.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about earlier, you know, it's super elegant in the style, but, you know, in the sequence of events, it's got that constant element of unexpectedness, you know, a sort of organicness that makes it feel so insane and so trippy. Because, like, you know, it follows events the way they might happen in real life in many ways, but you generally don't expect them to happen in movies while retaining this elegance of form. And it's this very interesting contrast.
Yeah. So circling back, like I said, I wanted to talk briefly a little more about that scene with him in the bathtub. I wrote down, you say this scene is hilarious, and I concur. I said that is the saddest scene in the film as well. I found myself laughing, but also feeling bad for Tony more than I did even in that finale, even then when he watched his sister die in front of him. You know, that's probably the lowest we ever see him. And it's this, you know, sad shot. It turns into this very sad shot. Everybody leaves the room and the camera pulls out. And he was yelling at Manny as he's leaving, but Manny is far gone. He can't hear him anymore. And he's still yelling at him, and then he just starts muttering to himself. And the camera just keeps pulling away. Like, I was like, when's this going to end? But we were stuck in this moment with Tony at his worst, just lounging, surrounded by stuff, you know, and nobody. And he's just muttering to himself. He's unhappy in the most decadent room I have ever seen. You know, I've never stepped foot in a museum that expensive, you know.
Sitting in a bathtub that's like bigger than some people's living rooms.
Yeah, right. And it makes me think of one of the few lines I wrote down that happened just before that. Tony is talking with Manny, who's a very, you know, this guy has this joie de vivre about him. He's always pretty happy and bouncy. And Tony shoots him down, and he just says, "You like ladies more than you like money." As if that is a moral shortcoming of his. I felt like those two moments in particular, very well encapsulated Tony's thoughts at that point in the film.
That's a fantastic point. I really liked how you pointed out the line, you like ladies more than you like money. I hadn't really thought of that line as significant, but I guess it does kind of show where Tony's priorities lie, where he like views women as objects and he views money as a more important object. It's the end goal.
Yeah, and that's kind of the downfall from the very beginning. The tagline is "The world is yours." Tony views the world and everything in it as a commodity for him to obtain.
Yeah, gotta agree.
Yeah. Seems we're running out of steam, but there is one more thing I wanted to mention before we can wrap this up. Can you think of that single moment where Tony is escorting Elvira?
Elvira, yeah.
He's escorting her to somewhere, and they get in that gorgeous tiger print car. And it's not just the seats that are tiger print. It's the doors and the steering wheel. It's everything inside. It's insane.
It's more than a little tacky, yeah.
But they're getting in that car, and Elvira gets in, and this is one of the single most insane camera movements I have ever seen in a film ever. The most unique dolly zoom I have ever seen. The camera pulls back as Tony is rounding the back of the car. So you get this shot of him in the back of the car, or behind the car, I should say. And then the camera pulls back so it can have him on the side. But the camera was also already in the middle of a zoom. So it creates this effortless dolly zoom out of nowhere that it just it's all of a sudden there. And then the camera pushes back in, but the zoom is still zooming at a faster rate than the camera is pushing. And so it simultaneously moves from a zoom to a dolly zoom to a separate dolly zoom in 5 seconds. I was stunned. I love dolly zooms so much, and I actually rewound it so I could watch it again.
Just unbelievably good.
And that's why De Palma is directing this film.
Effortless directing like that. You know, it's really funny. I just found this. You know the Razzies, the Golden Raspberry Awards?
Yep.
Apparently, De Palma was nominated for Worst Director.
What?
I'm not making this up. Oh yeah, I mean the Razzies are a complete joke and always have been. I mean, obviously it's a gag award, but you know they always nominate the wrong movies, and it kind of reflects how hated this movie was when it came out. But it's really interesting to just see how this movie, which is legitimately one of the best directed movies I've watched in ages, was just so hated in its own time.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. All right, Ethan, love discussing Scarface with you tonight. I'm so glad we watched it, and I'm so glad we both liked it. Folks, that's about all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much for listening, as always. We really appreciate it. And please tune in next week when we'll be discussing the one and only film, The Big Lebowski, directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, which I have not previously seen, despite being a huge Coens fan, and I'm very much looking forward to. You can contact us on Instagram or on Twitter. Our Instagram is Armchair Critics Podcast, and our Twitter is @CriticsArmchair. Armchair Critics was taken. We're sorry. Or you can email us at armchaircriticspodcast@gmail.com. You could leave us movie suggestions, feedback, thoughts, pretty much anything you can think of. We really appreciate you listening to the end here, and we hope you have a great night.